Being and Caring, A Psychology for Living by Victor Daniels and Laurence J. Horowitz, as read by The Happy President. Part 1, Foundations. Chapter 2, Enjoying Life, From Judgment to Appreciation. We all have the capacity to enjoy life, but instead we may act out old habits that darken our days and sabotage our hopes. The admonition to keep a stiff upper lip, for instance, can make it hard to smile easily. Achievement, serious demeanor, and worthiness are equated, and people who readily laugh or smile are not to be taken seriously. In this view, if a task isn't at least a little unpleasant, we must be doing it wrong. This be serious attitude is pervasive in our working world. If we don't want to live that way, we can find ways to enjoy what we do. A light touch feels especially good when we're dealing with matters of gravity. It helps us develop a sense of perspective and contributes to the creativity that's so needed in problem solving and decision making. As a clergyman observed when he told his congregation of his decision to switch from fire and brimstone sermons to those that celebrate the bountiful gifts that the Lord has bestowed upon us, there are over 800 happy texts in the Bible. If God said that many times to be glad and rejoice, he must surely have meant it. Learning to celebrate our existence in work, play, and relationships is both a religious and a spiritual charge. Unless I'm living in a way that pleases me, my actions and projects are unlikely to nourish others. Consider an unhappy, embittered mother who sacrifices herself to give her daughter everything. The gifts her daughter carries with her are the mother's unhappiness and bitterness, and her guilt. On the other hand, if you enjoy your own existence, your actions and undertakings are more likely to help others enrich their lives too. It may take time, but what else have we got to do that's more important than learning how to be good to ourselves and to those around us? Self-esteem. How fully we enjoy our lives is dependent on our self-esteem, how we feel about ourselves and perceive our value to others. High self-esteem, an attitude that includes self-respect and good feelings about ourselves, makes it easy to enjoy life. Low self-esteem, an attitude that includes feelings that we're somehow wrong, bad, or inadequate, makes it harder. A tragic irony is that if my own self-esteem is low, I may depreciate others so I can feel good by comparison. At least I'm not as bad as you. In doing that, I challenge their self-esteem. Thus, self-esteem is a learned process that emerges from our social interactions. To a significant degree, it's an estimate of how I perceive the people in my environment valuing me. Arthur, an X-ray technician, has only recently begun to raise his self-esteem. He comments, "When I was a child, everything I did was criticized or punished, often in front of company. I felt inadequate. My stepfather didn't think me good enough to eat the same food he did. Once for a month and a half, he didn't speak to me, look at me, or in any way recognize that I existed. At 18, unknown to my family, I changed my name, gathered up every picture ever taken of me, and burned them all. Now I see this picture burning as a statement of how much I had come to hate and despise myself." We can start to deal with such feelings in ourselves and avoid passing them on to future generations. A child who has been abused, physically or emotionally, is often a child abuser as an adult. My 3-year-old daughter just came in from the other room and said, "You have to stop typing so it will be quiet. Mama's trying to put the baby to sleep." I went in and checked with my wife. "No," she said, "you're not too noisy. I didn't say anything." I could have chided my daughter. "You mustn't interrupt me, and with lies, too." She would have felt bad, wrong, and unworthy. I would have contributed to lowering her self-esteem. Instead, I sensed what was going on. With my wife putting the baby to sleep and me busy typing, my daughter was left to herself. "You want me to stop typing and be with you for a while?" "Yes, that's right." I hope she learned that her feelings were valued and that she's worth my responding to. The nature of judgment. We all know the feeling many American Indians call bitterness in our hearts. When I feel this way, I tend to pass harsh judgment on whomever or whatever comes my way. As I pass judgment, I separate myself from others. Sometimes such a judgment is loud and clear enough for everyone to hear. At other times, it's subtle, just an instant of tightness, a flash of thought that's almost gone before I notice it. All these are depreciative judgments. Evaluation, preference, and judgment. Our own judgments about what we do and don't value provide us needed life orientation and guidance. Constructive criticism of our ideas and undertakings gives us feedback about what's useful and what isn't. But we don't have to transform the need for constructive appraisal into habitual rejection through judgment that can pervade our lives, interfere with our appreciation of others, and demean the beauty in our world. To clarify that distinction, when I have to make decisions or choose among alternatives, I call it evaluation. Yes, this one is better for my purposes than the other one. Evaluation is considering the effects of something. Is it helpful or harmful? To whom, how, under what circumstances? If you prefer the terms criticism or judgment for such appraisal, thinking in terms of evaluative judgment or evaluative criticism can help avoid confusion with depreciative judgment. Liking or disliking, by contrast, is primarily a feeling process. I enjoy this more than that. My likes and dislikes are partly the result of helpful learning that protects me and keeps me out of trouble, and partly the result of accidental learning and old conditioned responses that once were appropriate but now are confining habits. When I pay attention to what I actually prefer now, I'm likely to respond more openly. Instead of staying locked into old habits. I may be hesitant to admit some of my likes and dislikes. If I'm uneasy about some preference or afraid I'll have to defend or justify it, I'm likely to disguise it as a judgment. Instead of saying, I don't like Brian, I say, Brian's a jerk. He is, you know. Instead of stating my own feelings, I pretend even to myself that I'm responding to the way things are. I use the term projective judgments for these feelings disguised as judgments. I assign my own feelings to some aspect of the person, thing, or event I'm judging instead of recognizing that they come from me, not acknowledging that I feel hostile towards you. I label your action as stupid or ridiculous. Thus, I define you in terms of what's happening in me. Effects of depreciative judgment. Accusations, condemnations, and rejection contribute to low self-esteem in others, and when directed inward, maintain it in ourselves. The weighing, anticipating, withholding, and limiting they involve stop me from being open and giving. When I let go of judgment in this sense, I open myself to a broader canvas of experience. An old Hasidic story has it that a poor rabbi gave his last few pennies to the town ne'er-do-well. In response to his critics, he said, "Shall I be more finicky than God who gave it to me?" Habitual judging makes life brittle. Few things steal more vitality or cast a chillier, darker mood than the habit of criticizing and condemning. Being a habitual critic also affects the quality of friendships. Even though when I put someone down, others might say, "Yeah, you really said it to him." After that, they're on guard against being my next victim. And I cut myself off from hearing others. If I hurt you, I'd hear your pain at what I say and do to you. So I reduce the contact we might have had. In important relationships, I can't nourish myself by poisoning you. A chronic critic in time becomes harder, more hostile, more egotistical. Since several popular writers have glorified one-upmanship, it's important to remember that champion one-uppers leave their victims one down. They may evoke others' admiration and fear, but seldom their affection. We can think about the counsel Jesus offered. Pass no judgment, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Acquit, and you will be acquitted. Give, and gifts will be given you. For whatever measure you deal out to others will be dealt to you in return. Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius commented, "Men exist for the sake of one another. Teach them or bear with them." When I feel an impulse to criticize people, I might first ask myself, am I willing to take the time to show them a better way and do it non-judgmentally so they'll be willing to hear? Do I know a better way, really? Discovering what's beneath our judgments. When I'm clear with myself, my words and attitudes describe things as I see them. I don't pretend to call them as they are. So instead of saying, it's good, I say, I like it. Instead of saying, it's bad, I say, I don't like it. Doing this isn't easy, for my old habits are strong. When, for instance, I'm angry at what someone does, I'm tempted to, and sometimes do, yell, you idiot, or something more colorful. When I do that, I'm labeling the person, not the behavior, as wrong, and the odds are the person will get angry at me in return. He or she wants to feel in the right, and the only way to do that is to have me in the wrong. Similarly, I don't have to respond to another's anger at me by depreciatively judging him or her, a usual surefire ticket to escalation. Recently, I slowly backed up my truck into the car behind me. It was only a small bump, but the man came out of the car very angry, saying, "Well now, what do you call that?" My response was, "A dumb move on my part." He was so diffused that after he found that his car was all right, he ended up saying, "Well, I'm glad everything turned out okay," and we shook hands, smiled at each other, and left. When we don't feel impelled to respond to hostility with hostility, we're apt to make better contact with people and resolve issues more effectively. At first, I may have a hard time telling the difference between evaluation and depreciation, but with continued attention, I can learn to discriminate between them. If I'm insecure enough, I may take your evaluative comment as a demeaning judgment, regardless of your manner. Still, I'm more likely to hear you when you tell me your feelings or when you describe how you react to what I do, than when your words or voice imply that you're better and I'm worse. It is important that we acknowledge our humanity. I don't have to pretend to be non-judgmental about things I really do judge. For example, when we lose a close friend or loved one through circumstances that might have been avoided, forgiving those responsible may seem like too much to ask. As you feel the bitterness that lingers on in you, be gentle with yourself. If you forgive no one else, at least forgive yourself. Nietzsche had a word for us. I know of the hatred and envy of your hearts. You are not great enough to know hatred and envy. Be great enough, then, not to be ashamed of them. Discounting ourselves. Many people, not just those who chronically feel bad about themselves, disparage themselves as much as, or even more than, they put down others. Of course, most of us are more likely to discount ourselves when we already feel down and blue. The I'm not okay pattern. When I was a child, if adults told me how deficient and defective I was, after a while I began to believe it. I introjected that message, took it into myself uncritically without chewing it through and evaluating it. So now I disparage myself in many areas of my life. I feel that I'm not okay. All these pangs of annoyance and uptightness about myself add up to too many dark hours. When I'm out in the world feeling this way, other people reflect back these dark feelings, making my world grayer still. To some degree, this has happened to most of us. How many times a day, in small ways or large ones, do you feel inferior? But ask yourself, inferior compared to what? Compared to what you might realistically expect to be and do, given your background and the breaks you've had? Of course not. That way you'd come out right where you are. Every person has an easy time with some things and a hard time with others. Every person has an easy time with some things and a hard time with others, even though it may seem as if some people are good at everything. You can relax some of your self-judgment and appreciate that you're different from anyone else. You're not just this or that. Like each of us, you're a whole collection of abilities and potential ways of being. What a gift! You can improve your skill at doing almost anything once you get rid of your image of yourself as no good at it. If you're weak in one thing, you're potentially strong in a complementary area. I'm not so good at cocktail parties, but I can be a delight person to person. Some people think that being down on themselves helps them change. It does just the opposite. My mind can play all kinds of tricks to keep me from noticing when I act in a way I don't like, making me work twice as hard to be aware of what I'm doing than when I feel all right about my decisions. Acknowledging what I'm doing makes awareness of it easier. Here's one of the most important statements in this book. At this point in your life, at this moment in time, however you are, it's all right for you to be that way. To feel what you feel, to think what you think, to do what you do. What is, is. What you are, you are. Recognizing that can make it easier to begin moving today in directions that will help you feel better about your life tomorrow. Shoulds. Every depreciative judgment about myself has a should at its center. I should be a certain way, and if not, I'm defective. In the course of a day, I may get mad at myself because I didn't do what I think I should have done. Similarly, sometimes I get angry at others because they didn't do what I think they should have done. Should, as it's widely used, carries a quality of absoluteness. The things I should do are right, and the things I shouldn't do are wrong. And that's that. Many of these are old messages from other times and situations. Some are appropriate now, and some aren't. In my life, I do what I do. My action brings certain consequences. If I don't confuse myself by thinking, I should have done something else, I can see those consequences and learn from them. When my mind is filled with what I should have done, ordinarily I don't find out as much about what happened as a result of what I did. None of this means that we shouldn't have shoulds. We all have shoulds. If you try not to have any, you'll blind yourself to the ones you do have. When you pay attention to your shoulds and should nots, you can notice especially the impossible shoulds, such as what I should have done. As you learn which shoulds have real value for you and which ones don't, you can let the latter find their place among the old photographs and memories of your yesterdays. Working with judgments. Monitoring depreciative judgments can decrease their frequency and intensity. The most reliable way to monitor your judgments is to count them. After a while, you and your fault findings will be on more familiar terms. You'll find it easier to hear yourself when you judge. You'll be aware of tightness in your jaws and stomach, your shallow breathing, and the narrowness in your voice. Monitoring judgments can also serve as a channel of self-knowledge through our self-observations of our motives and desires as we judge. These can help us find our underlying positive intent, saying yes to ourselves. There are several alternatives to depreciative judgment. One is positive judgment. I declare a person or event right, good, or as it should be. The hazard here is that I'm still operating from a judgmental framework and can easily slip over into negative or depreciative judgment. If you were less appreciative than you were judgmental, how did you sabotage yourself? The theory of positive intent. In every piece of behavior, no matter how destructive, there is some kernel of an intent to grow. The theory of positive intent involves finding that pure kernel of growth intent, labeling the growth process, nourishing it, and enabling the individual to find ways of expressing it that are self-enhancing and not self-destructive. They cite the example of a wife who learned as a little girl that she would be seen as weak and would be depreciated if she expressed hurt. Now, instead of telling her husband when she feels hurt by something he does, she starts calling him names. He feels put down, gets angry at her, attacks back, and the cycle escalates. Luthman and Kirschenbaum take due note of the destructive behaviors emitted by each of the spouses, and then go beneath them to point out that the woman's positive intent is that she hopes for understanding and appreciation of her feelings. So appreciating what's going on involves 2 steps. 1, recognizing what it is in our behavior that drives away the very response we want from others or that defeats us in other ways. 2, recognizing that we don't defeat ourselves because we're bad, sick, stupid, or crazy, but when we don't recognize and honor our own positive intent nor that of others. The theory of positive intent helps us take an apparently negative, destructive behavior and use it as a starting point for growth. The perfection in what is. Perfection has two very different meanings. One is the gradual change from being imperfect to being perfect. The other is the perfection of each thing that exists just as it is right now. One day, as I sat by a creek listening to its voices, I reached into the water and scooped up a handful of stones. I looked at them, glistening, and realized that every stone was perfect. Some had intricate designs. One was a nice shape for throwing. A few were poetic in their ordinary grayness. There weren't good stones or bad stones. Every stone was absolutely perfect. As an old Chinese poem points out, in the landscape of spring, there is neither better nor worse. The flowering branches grow naturally, some long, some short. It's the same with people. Here and now, I'm a perfect me, and you are a perfect you. No one in the world can be as perfect a you as you are. None of this means that we need to tolerate troublesome conditions in our lives that we can change. Instead, the task is to get in touch with exactly how things are not okay and set out to remedy that. Saint Teresa of Avila said it beautifully. Lord, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Since I have some choice about how I feel, I can feel hostile, angry, and bitter as I work to change harmful conditions, or I can feel full, alive, and in contact with myself and my world. I find that I'm at least as effective in the latter case as in the former. R. Top, my favorite newspaper columnist, wrote one day, "If we all celebrated life, who could oppress or kill or hate his fellow man?" End of chapter 2.